Colorado has resumed giving out the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The CDC and FDA recommended suspending the shot so it could review reports of 6 individuals who got severe blood clots after receiving the vaccine. CBS 4 medical editor Dr. Dave Hnida is here now to talk more about the decision to resume the shot. And Dr. Dave, the CDC decided to bring back the Janssen vaccine, but with a warning. So what would you advise your patients and possibly even your family to do?
Well, I think at this point, it's probably going to be a while before we really see the Johnson & Johnson vaccine commonly used in Colorado. But I think when it comes to patients, the advice will really be made on an individual basis, and that is the risk versus the benefits. When you take a look at the benefits of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's a one and done. I mean, it's quick protection. You get your vaccine, 2 weeks later, you are pretty much good to go. Then you take a look at the potential risks, and I think it's very important that people who opt to get a Johnson & Johnson vaccine because it is convenient and easy for them, be aware that for women age 50 and younger, that there is an increased risk of potentially life-threatening blood clot. And so you say, well, what is that risk? We think it's about 1 in 80,000, which seems high, maybe doesn't seem high, but when you compare it to everyone else in the population, that risk is about 1 in 1 million or lower. So you really do have to take a look at the risk benefits. Now, in terms of what I would say to my family right now, everybody who can be vaccinated is fully vaccinated. But if we had to start fresh as of today, I think really where we would go with this is I would talk to the folks who are not female and say, well, you know, you can go ahead and be vaccinated with whatever you choose. But for females in the family under the age of 50, I would be a little bit hesitant and say, you know, we do have an abundance of the other 2 vaccines. I know that you mask. I know that you are very good with your social behaviors, and so your risk is pretty low. So you do have the time to allow to get a vaccine that requires a second dose. So I think, you know, personally, that is just simply my opinion in terms of what I would recommend for my family. In terms of patients, it certainly is their decision, but it needs to be an informed choice.
Absolutely. And this is an interesting one. So the state has reached a point where demand for vaccines is no longer exceeding supply. And now we're hearing of people who are just entirely skipping their second vaccine. Does this worry you?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues here. You know, it's good that we have an abundance of vaccine in the state. That's great. It means we have a lot of vaccine. But it is a problem from the standpoint of people not utilizing the vaccines. We still have a percentage of people who just are not getting vaccinated, and that is a concern. The good news with that is that the percentage of people who are so-called vaccine hesitant or not being vaccinated continues to decrease each month as we see the vaccine's effectiveness and really its overall safety. The big thing, though, that you raise is what about people who are skipping their second doses? This is a big problem. They're skipping it for a variety of reasons. Some people are concerned about more severe or more uncomfortable side effects after a second vaccine. Some people are having inconvenience in terms of getting that second vaccine done. And some of that actually rests on the part of some of the pharmacies, which have been having some scheduling issues and difficulties through there. And let's face it, you know, it's just the information out about some problems with the J&J vaccine gives some people pause about getting vaccinated again. And I think this is a really big problem, skipping that second dose, because there's the issue of really what is your protection? It's really not as good as you would like with just a single dose. There is a concern about the immunity that you get just from a single dose. We don't know how long it lasts. And with the variants that are circulating, that becomes a bigger problem. So if you're on the fence right now and you're saying, well, do I really need this second vaccination? please get your second dose. And you do have a little bit more time than you probably thought. We used to think you maybe had 2 to 3 days window to get that vaccine done, either at the 3-week mark or the 4-week mark, depending on which vaccine you were given. We now believe that window of getting a second vaccine is up to 42 days, 6 weeks after the first vaccine. So you do have time. I would really urge you to please make sure you get that second vaccination done.
That's some great information for people who may have had some of those scheduling issues with pharmacies, that they do have some time and leniency with getting that second dose. So the LA Dodgers recently debuted an area in the stands for fully vaccinated people. Do you think that's a good model that other teams, possibly the Rockies, should adopt?
This is really kind of interesting because when you look at what the Dodgers are doing in Los Angeles and also what the Giants are doing in San Francisco, they have actually dedicated sections where if you show proof that you are fully immunized or proof of a negative COVID test, you basically can go to a section that is very wide open in terms of just the ability to not have to have social distancing and so forth. It is more of a so-called real ballpark experience. Now, is this something that can be done here in Colorado, or is it something that can be done elsewhere around the country? And it really boils down to several factors. I think location is a big thing. If you take a look at Los Angeles specifically, and you take a look at San Francisco specifically, their case rates, their hospitalization numbers relative to population are much less than what's going on here in Colorado. And when you take a look at the test positivity rates in Los Angeles and San Francisco, their test positivity rates are 1% or lower. Here in Colorado, we are still above 5%, tickling 6% at times, which is way too high. So I think it is really more of a regional issue when you look at Colorado and the rest of the country. You also take a look at really what is going on in this state and elsewhere when it comes to mandates. You go to some place like Texas and really it's pretty much wide open. I think that we may soon see some relaxation of the mask mandates here in Colorado. So that will have an effect on really what we're able to do in terms of going to the ballpark. And here's a really subtle, interesting aspect of this. It has to do with can Los Angeles and San Francisco require people to show a so-called, really, we're talking about a vaccine passport. And the answer is technically they have a little bit more leeway here because they are privately owned stadiums. We're not talking about the teams. We're actually talking about the physical structure of the stadium. Just like any other business, if you are a private business, you have a lot more latitude in requiring what your customers or clientele must do in order to visit you. And that's not the case here in Colorado. So I think at this point in time, it's going to be a wait and see. It's good to see some relaxation in other areas. Whether or not we're there yet in Colorado remains to be seen. We got to get our numbers down. And that, I think, is really the bottom line here.
A lot of interesting stuff this week. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Dave, and we'll talk to you again next Monday at 11 a.m. to get more of those coronavirus and vaccine questions answered.